Hi, welcome to Don't Get Rusty, where we have fun chatting about the things that will help keep you proficient. Today, our webinar is Keeping Current with Mark Baker, where we will be chatting with our AOPA President. If you will give me just a few seconds, we'll jump right into introductions, but I'll go over a couple of housekeeping things to get started. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. It will show up on the AOPA Live YouTube channel within about 24 hours. Also, this webinar is not, I say not, eligible for Wings credit. The one next week will be, so stand by. And also, this is a shortened version of our Don't Get Rusty webinar. After we scheduled the webinar, the FAA requested Mark Baker to show up on a FAA town hall, and so he will be leaving us at about 30 minutes past the hour. But before that, we're gonna chat and we're gonna have fun. If you'll give me just a few seconds here, we're gonna go over one screen. We have shortened our screen. If you want to interact with our panelists, just click on that little bubble and you can ask a question and you'll be in touch with our producers, one of whom is Steven. Steven, say hi.
Hi.
And you'll get a question. So remember, it's only going to be 30 minutes, so get your questions in quickly. Okay, introductions. As I said, my name is Keith West. And my role at AOPA is to help flight schools to deliver a better flight training experience. I'm joined by my colleague and fellow panelist, Chris. Chris, introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Moser, and my role at AOPA is right in the same team with Keith, and I work with CFIs in schools and more on the educational side of things to provide also an excellent experience with a focus on good education. And of course, I'm joined by the third part of the triumvirate of flight training, Pablo Morelia. Pablo.
Thanks, Chris. Joining you from the Chicago office. I do the technical things for You Can Fly, and amongst them is a very exciting game-changing in-cockpit training app. Teaser. But let's begin with Mark Baker. I have the pleasure of introducing my favorite CEO, and that is Mark Baker. And maybe, to start, Mark, welcome, and maybe you could just give us a quick intro on GA and AOPA here.
Thanks, Pablo, Chris, Keith. It's a my pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, I got to cut it a little bit short. As you say, I've got to get on with the FAA. But GA is doing well and has done really good things over the last several months with the COVID issues, whether it's moving product or people around the country. And now we're seeing real significant activity around the airports where we're basically maybe even with last year's operations, in some cases up, in some cases slightly down. But the avgas sales are going through the roof in a lot of places, and people are out buying airplanes and joining AOPA. So from an AOPA perspective, we're in a very difficult time, and we're concerned about a lot of our people, our members and aviators, our professional aviators and recreational aviators. We're going to focus on the good things that we can do to kind of move through this issue that we have right today. So thanks for having me on.
Great. And so, Mark, so is what I'm hearing that you're saying that GA activity is on the increase now?
Yes, it is. We measure, the FAA does measure 77 airports about what's going on in the tower control, and they look at every day, every week, the totals. And GA activity in some cases is up significantly over last year, 10-20%. Some of these airports, the total is off about 5 to 10% last week compared to last year at the same time. So if you consider what's been going on, and a lot of that GA activities even includes business jets and other things like that, we're seeing a pretty significant move in the piston and fleet. And many of you probably saw the note last week. There was actually more Skyhawks in the air than there were Boeings in the air last week.
What do you think that's attributed to? I mean, with COVID and basically, riots, there's all this stuff. It's like a totally different time. So why are things picking up when I think it's against what, the general, right? The usual?
Well, I would say that there's a couple of things going on. Is that the ability to be out in an airplane being social distancing can work for a lot of people. I think there's a lot of folks that are trying to get recurrent from the long fall, the long activity off, which we want to make sure they're doing it safely. But I also think that people moving around the country today are actually really considering using GA as compared to possibly the airlines, which we know are off 80-90%. In some cases, the schedules don't even take you there anymore. So while people do need to get around the country to see family or do business, I think they're using general aviation as a real alternative today in a significant way.
So I guess the question is that something that you think maybe will be sustained as well? I mean, I know I'm hopeful for that, but what are your thoughts on just how long that tail will sort of last out?
Well, anecdotally, talking to a lot of flight schools around the country that I know personally, and through what you guys bring up, is that we're seeing people returning to aviation that may have stepped away for a while, been using the airlines, deciding that they're going to take charge of themselves. And you've seen this in other recreational activities as well, boating and camping, all those kinds of things have taken a significant spike. And I think General Aviation is seeing a mini boom right now that I think is actually sustainable. Once you get back in that left seat, you can move yourself around the country if that's what your needs are to do, or just for fun to get up there and play with your airplane and go somewhere and stay current, stay safe. So a lot of the flight schools are seeing a returning of people that want to get either recurrent, finish up a rating, and move on. So internally to AOPA, we've seen significant activity in the number of people wanting to buy airplanes. About half the calls we get coming in every day now, it's the legal services about airplane contracts. Our financing business at AOPA is up significantly for financing aircraft. So it's a good time, I think, right now for general aviation. And I think it's going to sustain itself. I really do believe it will.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yeah, well, that's great, Mark, and that's what I've been seeing too as I get out and fly. In fact, I had my first dual flight with a student yesterday, and in about 3 months, and there were a lot of people out there. But my question is, do you see any lasting impacts from GA, or do you think that this is just a blip and that we're going to be able to get back to where we were, 4 or 5 months ago?
I do believe it's sustainable. And the idea that people are going and getting current, or looking at joining the flying club, as you've seen, you guys have done a great job at the You Can Fly group, had 150 flying clubs, and even over this pandemic period, having new flying clubs being formed. People are interested in aviation. People are going to be, I think, re-exposed, if you will, to general aviation. I think it'll be sustaining. I think it's exciting for those of us who've been around it all the time. Once you get bitten by that bug, it's hard to let it go. And I do think that the realities of the airlines going through the terminals is a different value equation than when you look at just simply transporting yourself. The airlines have always been pretty efficient from a low-cost way to move around the country. And in some cases made it hard to justify, if you will, an aircraft for a move. But when you start to add the complexities of walking through a terminal and getting on an airline, and in many cases the schedule doesn't even exist today to get up to a lot of these essential air service cities where you may have customers or family and you want to get to. So I think it's going to be with us for a long time, that general aviation is going to be a real choice in transportation.
That's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
With COVID-19, the slowdown, both in airline activities and GA, how do you think this will affect the pilot shortage?
Well, it's interesting when people talk to me about the pilot shortage, and we know that there was a significant shortage as we started to think about January and filling slots for airline pilots around the world and even in the U.S. I still think that our You Can Fly and our high school program is a really important piece, because the timelines, 7, 8, 10 years from the time you're in high school to the time you get to maybe a potential through all your training and be available for professional flying is a long timeline. And I think there'll still be a pilot shortage at some point in time as it relates to that return activity. But partly I also believe that we're going to see people looking to hire more 135 charter operators. There's going to be a big need. I've seen growth, with whether it's Wheels Up or NetJets, start to return to the air. There's going to be opportunities for professional aviators. It may be a little bumpy here for the next 6 to 9 months or a year, but there beyond, I think there's no question there's going to be a need for more professional pilots.
Yeah, I know I had heard that some of the charter operations are really getting just tons of requests in, but one of the things that comes to my mind though is the idea, with obviously going with professional pilots flying, but I know that you're a very active pilot. You fly all the time. So especially for our audience here for this webinar, what are some of the ways that you find flying as much as you do to maintain proficiency, especially when potentially shifting airplanes or other things like that?
Yeah, I think first of all, we know the more you fly, the safer you are, because you stay current with whether it's the winds, crosswinds, weather, knowledge about the aircraft. It's always better if you fly more. So I always encourage people to fly as much as they can. Fly with somebody. Fly with an instructor. Fly with a buddy that's got access to an aircraft, and stay in the air and stay safe. Because as I move between tailwheel airplanes and float planes and turbine aircraft, one of the things I want to make sure is I don't forget you're in a different aircraft, and it requires a different set of awareness, if you will, about how to best handle that aircraft and what the capability of that aircraft is, and to listen to that aircraft. About they all sound a little different. What was that little vibration? Pay attention to that. It's telling you something.
But that's a really good point, and something I had a personal question about. I mean, you fly so many different type of aircraft. How do you stay current in all those different aircraft, basically at the same time, being able to jump from one airplane to another?
Yeah, well, I do, and I'm very lucky, Keith, that I get to have access to a lot of different aircraft. But when I sit in an airplane, and I went through this before, I think about the basic tenets about where's the fuel, how's the fire, whatever the engine is, and how is it doing, and then the flight controls, all have different senses and movements and purposes in different aircraft. And I want to make sure that I think about that as I sit in each time in the left seat. Where are those basic tenets? And so I'm aware that I'm moving from one aircraft to the other, because you handle a King Air way different than you handle a Super Cub, and yet they'll both take you to the same place. One takes a little longer, but I take a great deal of pride in that understanding, reading the manuals. I know it takes a long time, but making sure that you really spend the time to understand you're in a different aircraft. It's important, but I am lucky. I do get to fly a lot, whether it's a Super Cub or on floats or on a 185 on a tail wheel or other stuff. It's been really rewarding to do that. But I fly 400 or 500 hours a year.
Wow,
that's awesome.
That is a lot. Yeah.
So based on those hours, is there like I'm not going to ask you the favorite aircraft of all time or anything like that, but in those 400 to 500 annual hours, is there something that you kind of say, I prefer this one over the other ones?
Well, always the answer is whatever one you're in is my favorite one, because you never want to make that aircraft mad. But and I've said this all continually. I really do believe in the reason why I've kept this one aircraft, even though I've owned lots of different airplanes. My Super Cub I've had over 25, almost 30 years now. And whether it's on wheels or amphibious floats, or used to put it on skis when I lived in the north, because you go fly more often, because you may go for only a 20, 30-minute ride, because it's so easy to push in and out. The visibility is great. Nothing flies like a Cub, the Super Cub, particularly with the bigger engine. It's very rewarding to take people for rides and helping experience aviation in a Super Cub, because you see everything so well, and it's low and slow. But today I don't mind saying I'm in Wyoming, and I'm on a mission here to enjoy my 185 in the backcountry of northern Montana and Idaho, and it's a very capable airplane for that kind of work. So 185s and Super Cubs have always kind of been near and dear to my adventure spirit, if you will.
So I've got two quick questions. One is more of a silly question, maybe. Just curious, do seaplanes, you always hear about airplanes when you fly over water, they always sound funny as soon as you cross over the water. Do seaplanes just do that all the time? But the other one being, like, I'm kind of curious in the bigger sense of talking about proficiency, which I think is amazing, and the fact that I think there's a lot to be said for really preparing, thinking about before I go flying and reviewing the airplane I'm going to fly, really important. Do you see that flying for proficiency, is that, obviously, I think it sounds like a good thing for personal part, but is that also a good thing for the good of GA? Is there a larger picture to that for us as pilots and for our audience?
Well, your first question about the auto rough, whenever I get over the mountains or over big water, even in an amphibious float plane or 185 in the backcountry here, it does seem to have an auto rough. I don't know why, but it doesn't seem to occur on a multi-engine airplane for whatever reason. On my head. But because you do think about what my alternative landing spots are all the time, and I've had 3 or 4 engine failures over, more like 5, over my 40-some years of flying, and all of them worked out just fine. But you have to be thinking that something could go wrong, and that's part of the proficiency thing you just mentioned, which is, if you fly enough, you will be challenged, whether it's the weather or the machine. Circumstances will challenge you, and that's okay. But proficiency is what really matters, and that's why General Aviation can continue to lower the accident rate, the fatal accident rate's half what it was 25 years ago, because of what we're trying to do at AOPA, the Air Safety Institute, by sharing what goes wrong and telling people you got to stay proficient. And proficiency is different for different aircraft. You can step away from a Cub for a little longer than you can step away from a highly complex airplane and feel comfortable.
So this one is probably something you've answered 1,000 times. So for 1,001, what got you into aviation? You know, you know, for a lot of us, and I always say, I've always been near an airport in Chicago. And so as a kid, you know, it's like, oh, that'd be great. But what got you into it, officially into it, and then what has kept you there?
So, you know, one of the reasons I have so much passion for our aviation high school program is I took my ground school in high school in the 11th grade. And it was my first real exposure to it. Nobody in my family flew at that point in time. My grandfather worked during World War II, kind of assembling B-24 bombers, doing some of that stuff. And my father was an airplane cleaner while he was in high school in Minnesota. So they talked about aviation, but they didn't really have anything. But I went for, you know, those penny a pound rides as a little kid out to the airport, and ride my bicycle to the airport, and just watch with wonderment. You know, one of these days. And then as I moved through high school and into college, I took ground school again at the University of Minnesota, and then started flying. And I and a partner bought a Cessna 150 from a farmer in northern Wisconsin for $4,200 total, $2,100 a piece. I had to sell my Dodge van, unfortunately, to do that, but it was worth it.
That's dedication.
Yeah, and I've pretty much since 1977, 8, I've owned airplanes and used them for business, used them for recreation, and just enjoy putting projects together, making airplanes even better today. So I've owned, you know, over 100 aircraft,
Wow.
different models, and I just love them.
Yeah. And so that's really interesting to me because, and to the best of my knowledge, you've never served as a professional pilot. Is that right?
That's correct. You know, never been paid to fly.
Well, and so, you know, I think a lot of our members are in the same situation. You know, I'm not a professional pilot. How can I do a lot of flying? But yet you've been able to work it into what with the roles that you've had, or is it just something that you want to do so much that, you know, you go out and do it?
You know, one of the reasons I believe so much in this high school aviation program is exposure. And, you know, I've always found people that have drive and passion for something, they find a way. Whatever way it is in becoming a flight instructor, joining the military, airlines, professional pilot, or find a way to make a few extra bucks, work extra hard, and maybe, you know, be a partner. I joined a flying club very early on, so I could afford to fly. And it was a great experience to have mentors and partners that you could fly with and gain knowledge. So I found a way, and I think part of the, as I call it, the drug in aviation made me better at my business because I was more flexible. I went to different meetings. I went to see stores and open stores and communities, and so one begot the other. You couldn't have done one without the other, in my opinion. Aviation allowed me to do a really significant role for a lot of the retailers that I was part of and led over the years, and so it was a payback. And then, you know, I'd tell you that I don't consider I wasted $1 in aviation. I spent a lot of money in aviation, but I didn't waste any of it.
Is there, so when you were thinking about, you know, you said you've owned over 100 aircraft. Is there something that, I guess, what's the, gosh, drive is a bad word, but what, was there something like you would just look at it and go, oh, gosh, I've never flown that kind of airplane, or, oh man, I've never had floats and I want to try that. And then you get sick of the float and then you move on to, you know, is it just kind of that, you know, like you said, that interest, you know, the love of it?
It is, you know, again, I remember sitting in this, the University of Minnesota ground school, looking out the window. This is 1977, and seeing a Baron, a brand new shiny Baron. And I thought to myself, it'll never happen, but one of these days I'd like to have one of those. I've had 13 different Barons, and part of the reason is I wanted to try them all. You know, whether there be an older 1964 B model to a pressurized, you know, 58 later on, or all the different models. One of the things I really enjoyed is learning about how those aircraft work and the different nuances. And the best way to do that is buy them and then learn how to fly them.
So, Mark, I mean, we could sit around asking you questions here and chatting about this all day, but Pablo is probably looking at questions from the audience. So, Pablo, if you would queue up a question. But I wanted to, something that struck me while you were talking about, because you can fly, we have the flying clubs, the flying club initiative, high schools and rusty pilots, and you mentioned two of them, you know, right up front there about high school exposure and flying clubs. Can you comment upon, you know, how your aviation experience led to what we're doing now to try to get more people involved in aviation and doing things?
Certainly, when I joined the AOPA, hard to believe, 7 years ago now nearly, I wanted to look at how we could re-energize the general aviation interest. As I talked to our members, there were two things that they cared most about early on here. One is, let's do something about the medical, because it's been talked about for 30, 40 years. We spent the first couple of years getting that done. So get the basic med, where you got 56,000 folks flying under basic med. And the second thing was get young people interested in aviation. And it was coming from our members. And I worked with a couple of significant donors and created this You Can Fly program, initially led by Katie Pribble and now led by Elizabeth, that has brought together the community in aviation, and donors completely support this, 100% membership dues, to try and create these programs. And I have been very proud of the activities that you do. The rest of the You Can Fly, I think, is working. You know, this fall we'll probably have nearly 10,000 kids in the high school program around the country in 30 states or 35 states, whatever it is. Seeing 150 flying clubs being created, again with donors. James Ray's, who I knew personally, and then later on as he passed, his foundation has supported these programs in such unique ways that allowed us to go out and penetrate these markets and get people interested in aviation again. That's working.
Excellent. So Pablo, what are our audience? What are they asking? What do they want to know?
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about the Legato threat?
The Legato threat, which was LightSquared a number of years ago, is a spectrum that is very, very close to the GPS signals that have been created over the last 25 years. And some of the equipment concerns at the moment are, could that bandwidth interfere with the GPS signals that we use today to navigate and make approaches and things like that. And there needs to be, and Senator Inhofe is leading the charge, who also is in charge of the Department of Defense as far as the Senate goes, to make sure that we can really fully understand what this band might do from an interference perspective. We want to support the idea that we can create more bandwidth for consumers if it makes sense, lower costs and more competition in all those categories. But it can't come at the expense of any risk to aviation's activity as it relates to GPS. So right now, I think it is on hold, and they're going to do a lot more studying.
Cool, thank you. Okay, as you can imagine, they're starting to pile on the questions now. Mark, and I'll just read it as it is. We've heard that the FAA is looking at the private airports and removing them from charts. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm involved in a private airport, and I'm sure with what there needs to be done. And I talked to the FAA and Adam Williams, who leads our airport activity at the DC office for AOPA. What they're trying to do is trying to keep these charts up to date, so that if you have a private airport, you're responsible to respond every 3 years to say, is it still open? Is it all the conditions the same? The contact's still the same? So that they can continue to chart these things, so that you have an emergency field knowledge that is an active strip versus ones that may have not be active and there may be trees and corn growing on it today. So that's what the reasons what they want to do, and I agree with it, and I have had to answer those questions myself. So it's important that the aircraft owner, well, the airport owner, sponsor, responds and just keeps those things on the chart. They want them on the charts. The FAA is not trying to get rid of them. They just want to make sure they're active and accessible.
Cool. All right, I got one more here. 6 minutes left. I'll make it quick. So generally speaking, on ADS-B, is the 100% target being met?
So 100% will probably never be met. You know, there's 200,000 plus aircraft in this country of general aviation ilk. And I think we're now approaching 120,000-ish aircraft that have been equipped with ADS-B. And there are aircraft in the middle of Nebraska, as an example. They'll never really need it because they aren't going into any of those places where we previously needed Mode C. So those aircraft will probably be a year maybe before they get sold. If sold outside of the state, may get there. But one of the things I would tell you that the radio shops that I talk to all the time are still installing a lot of these things. And the UAvionics, which brought lower cost to a device that you can put on by yourself and get it signed off by a mechanic. You know, people are equipping every day, and I think I'd like to see 100% because I believe the traffic would be better for all of us. I'd love to see people use the portability for getting weather in or how they would do it. But it's a great deal for general aviation.
Cool. All right, I got another one here for you. Well, sometimes you got to reread them a couple times, even though I put them in here. All right, so many local governments that are airport sponsors having financial issues, and some are looking at cutting airport budgets or even threatening to close airports. Is AOPA aware of this?
So, you know, through this COVID issue, we've not lost any access today on the public airports that we have out there, the 5,000 public airports. There are airports that are being challenged on the budget, but one of the things you saw in the CARES Act was to push through $100 million exclusively for general aviation airports to help them on their budgets, because they may not have as much fuel sales or other activities where they bring in some revenue and income to these nice, great airports around the country. I haven't heard of any ones that are really concerned right now. Now, the bigger airports are actually under a lot more stress than the smaller ones, because they were counting on passenger facility charges, what they call PFCs, which pays for a significant part of the terminals and constructions at the air carrier type airports. So those are the ones that are seemingly having more financial stress right now than the smaller airports. And I was at an airport in Wisconsin last weekend, and the guy said that was his 59th airplane to fill up that day for avgas. He hadn't seen that for 20 years. Wow. So some of these smaller airports are starting to see a lot of activity.
Wow. All right, thank you. I had to reread that one. Like I said, sorry. Oh boy. All right, you ready for this? Do you think ATC privatization is gone for good?
Oh. Gone for good. You know, no. But I would say that, you know, one of our best anecdotes now is the Canadians are raising their fees, some cases 30–40%, because ATC is not getting supported by the airline traffic in the fees aren't coming in to support ATC in Canada. So they're trying to raise rates. So we now have another argument, which we always were concerned about. What's going to happen when or if something happens to affect the revenue support that privatization would have brought, which would have been higher taxes, user fees. And then when they're interrupted, who's going to pay for it? In our system today, you know, the air traffic controllers are working hard. They're doing a great job. ATC is doing a good job. And we're able to move around this country uninterrupted. I think Canada is really a great example of what would have happened.
Cool. Okay. Okay, here's a good one on the Super Cub, one of our favorite topics. Other than the Super Cub, do you have the same communication systems in the different aircraft? And if so, is it if they're different, is it difficult to remember which one you're getting into in the different technologies?
You know, that's a very good question. You know, and one of the things that we've seen in this evolution of having low-cost avionics available to a lot of different aircraft that I think are fantastic compared to what it was just 20 or 30 years ago when you looked at a silver crown stack of radios, which might have been $40,000 for an aircraft, you know, 30 years ago. And then today you look at a good GPS with you know, glass panel, you know, like the Dynon or Garmin or others, Aspen, everybody has them. But they have different buttonology. You know, what do you use and how you do it. And this is one of the things, as I move between aircraft, my own aircraft are similarly equipped, but I do get a chance to fly a lot of other people's aircraft, which are not as equipped. I spend more time on the avionics kind of prep now when I move from aircraft to aircraft. In the old days, it was a VOR and a comm.
Right.
Move. Maybe an ADF if you're lucky enough, but
wow.
Yeah.
You mean to listen to the radio, right? That's how I listen to my AM stations.
Yeah. So, you know, it's one of the challenges to stay safe as you move between aircraft today is really understand the avionics. They're better, way better, but they could be different.
Totally. So, Pablo, we have time for one more question for Mark.
One more. Okay, gosh.
Choose wisely.
Well, I mean, the next one on the list was a COVID question, and it was basically based on, you know, as much as you fly, what are some of the ways that you have in your mind to stay safe while in the cockpit?
Well, in the cockpit, you know, travel with relatives and very close friends. You know, we know each other's health and do it that way. And then, you know, it comes down to the basic tenet of health is wash your hands. It's as simple as that, in my opinion. You know, I think that there is a lot of genuine concern, and we know certain populations that are significantly affected by this. On the other hand, you know, I believe that, you know, moving around the countryside in remote areas, it's pretty nice to be able to have an airplane to be able to get around and not have to go to a terminal.
Especially a big advantage for aircraft owners. I mean, obviously they can control that stuff. So
that's right.
Another plus.
Yeah,
it is.
All right, so we're at the end of our official webinar, and we would like to thank Mark for showing up and answering these questions. Pablo, you know, we talked about us hanging out and answering the questions that remained. Are we qualified at all to handle the questions still on the list? Or
no, and I think that's a good asterisk. We are not qualified. We're not AMPs.
As we say many times. Yeah, as we say many times, we are not professionals. You know, I can't believe they let us on the air, and after this one, Can we do the next show? Are we going to be okay?
Yeah.
All right. And so anyway, thanks again, Mark, for showing up. And Mark
Thank
is
you.
great. If you want to see
Appreciate
Mark, jump on the FAA Town Hall webinar, and you can continue. But that is going to be the end for us today. And if you join in next week, Thursday at 12 Eastern, we're going to be talking about cockpit distractions, how not to be distracted by things that go wrong in the cockpit. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks everyone for showing up. And that's all for today.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
All right. See you guys. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.